Welcome to There's a Lesson in Here Somewhere. Conversations with interesting people with fascinating stories to tell and from which we can draw important lessons. Here are your hosts, Jamie Serino and Peter Carucci.
Hello and welcome to There's a Lesson in Here Somewhere. I'm Jamie Serino.
And I'm Peter Carucci.
And we're here today with Liz Rosenberg, accomplished and award-winning author, poet, and professor. And you should know that Peter and I took a class with Liz. So it's a bit of a reunion of sorts. So
Yeah.
Welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Very nice to be here with you too.
Could you start off just maybe completing an introduction, a little bit more about yourself, something that you'd want to say?
Oh my golly. Let's see. Well, at this point, I have actually been teaching at Binghamton University for 45 years.
Wow.
That's a long time.
Congratulations.
And yes, I did start when I was 12.
Well, you are our origin story. You
All right.
are where Jamie Serino and I met in your class, and somehow your mindset and what you do wound up allowing us to be in a band together and touring the world and playing music and of course getting into poetry and creative writing and things like that. But you're where we met, and we've
That's
always had
so great.
a
That's
place
so great.
in our hearts and minds for you. And so this is really exciting for us.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
I love the idea that you guys connected and began to become friends in that class. Because honestly, creating a community inside a classroom is absolutely one of my main goals.
Mm.
So anytime I hear that that has happened or that has succeeded, um, I'm really, truly delighted about that. Yeah. I
and
think
I'm
there
trying
may have even been one marriage that
Oh,
came
wow.
out of two people,
Oh,
being
that's great.
in my class at the same time. I know there was, this is really kind of sad. There was an engagement that happened and was broken that began in my class. So, you know, one for two. I won't get into the whole.
you're
I
batting
guess
500.
the passion in the classroon couldn't continue beyond the classroom, I guess, right?
Maybe so. Maybe so.
And I'm trying to remember. I remember day one in your classroom. I remember where I sat because I remember, you go to your classes and you're like, the room in the building, and you go there, and I remember sitting there, and I remember it's bizarre because it's one of the rare memories I have of first class,
Hmm.
and it was you, and I remember thinking, I'm gonna like this class. I remember having that feeling, and you were just you know why? Also, your genuine humanity, your persona just came through,
Mm.
and it was captivating from day one. I have to share that with you.
Oh, that's lovely. And I want to ask you something. When did you first kind of become aware of Jamie as a sort of kindred spirit in that room with you? When did
It's
you guys kind of do that?
I I only Jamie, you gotta correct me here.
Oh,
I
yeah, I
remember
have my version
a
of
big
it too, so
circle. What's that?
I have my version of it.
I just remember a big circle, and we circled up, and we
Always,
were
yeah.
deciding to do, I guess, it was a project,
Yeah.
and we were either to work with others or whatever, and I remember somehow Jamie was like 3 seats over to my right, and somehow I don't remember the exact things, but I was like, "Oh, can we do it with music?" And I was like, "Well, I play guitar," and Jamie was like, "Oh, I play Jamie was like this, "I play drums." And I was like,
Ah,
"Oh, this is great.
yeah.
What do we work together, Jamie?" And he was like, "Yeah, let's work together on this project." That's my memory of it. I don't is that right, Jamie?
Well, so mine is he asked, "Can we do music?" And I was like, "Oh, that
I said
sounds." Yeah, right. Can we do? Can we?
Probably asking me, right?
Yeah,
Can you
ask
yeah,
do music?
well,
there it
Yeah.
is. And I was like, and then I like my ears perked up. I was like, "Oh, that would be awesome." And then Peter said, "I'm this really awesome guitarist that you've ever seen." And I was like, oh, yeah.
No, well, I think it may have backfired because I remember, and I think we talked about this on the phone. I remember because we were circled up, and this dude who I was sort of friends with, I don't want to say his name, let's say his name was Jason. He shows up and starts playing jazz records slowly. And he, on the phonograph, whatever, the record player in the corner,
The
Yeah.
Frank
and he
phonograph.
starts playing it, and he sits down, and I remember we're all looking at each other, and it was like a slow reveal. He
Mm.
goes, "I like to play this when I make love." And we were all, and I remember looking at you, Liz, your face, your face, because I was like this. I was like, I'm sure there were a few ladies who perked up, going, "Oh," but I was like, "Wait, can you say that? Can we do that? Can we talk about this?"
Can
And
you say that?
Liz, you guided the whole thing into like, okay, like somehow you got it focused into whatever it was that had to do with what we were talking about in like class or something. I
Yeah.
was like, whoa.
Yeah, your class was like one of those classes where, because I just sort of shrugged. This guy said it. I was like, I like jazz too, and I was like, this guy's all right,
This
and
is
I
when
just
I like it. Yeah.
and I was just like, all right, this. And I remember that class, and I took a drugs and behavior class, and people said whatever the hell they wanted in that class, and a
Mm.
lot of people said what they wanted in your class, and I think that was part of the community being built, and this feeling that people could talk about whatever and disagree. I remember this one guy was talking about Nine Inch Nails lyrics and
Yes.
saying how much he thought like it was this, great expression. And then this woman was like, well, he's really angry, and anger is not the only emotion. And I think he's not really emoting well because he just speaks through anger. And it got this guy so upset. And I was like,
Mm.
she's kind of right, because what it was like with Nine Inch Nails was that for music, we were coming out of the 80s, which had this sort of, the harder, heavier music was very glossy and did not really say much. And then you had grunge and alternative, and they were starting to say
Right.
things. And so Trent Reznor was like held up as like, oh, this guy's like saying something, and the music is heavy. And so I think that's where this guy was coming from. But then the woman coming from it from a poetry's perspective was like, he's not really emoting, he's just angry. And I remember that being this, it stirred up the pot a bit, and people were kind of getting on sides there. It was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot, but
Yeah.
what's crazy is that as an educator, you allowed for full expression and guided it in a strange, almost like, I can't even explain it, into the focus that it needed to be ultimately. It's a rare gift. And as we talked about before, I went into education for an alternate career path to music, and you made such a mark on how I operate or operated
Oh,
in education that I think you need to hear that.
well, I'm delighted to hear that and very touched.
So question, so when I took the class because I had always been writing, but I mostly wrote like short stories and stuff. And then all of a sudden something changed in my brain, and I began writing poetry, right? And I
Mhm.
didn't really know why. And I wasn't really, I'd read poetry here and there, but I just was like, why am I writing like this? And then I took the class, and then I was really learning about poetry. And you taught poetry, and then you had us writing and doing creative, expression and stuff. And that really helped. And then it was like a phase for me because I will occasionally write poetry here and there, but I still really write like short stories and stuff. But it was this phase. And so is there something you could say about like when you started writing poetry, or what it was that this is a form of expression for me?
Mm. Well, I was actually thinking, Jamie, that it's interesting that you two wanted to do music. That to me says a lot about why you were probably drawn to poetry
Mm.
because it's such a musical way of using language. and people who are very drawn to that musical aspect and kind of can hear how rhythm and tone can change so much about what you're saying and how it's heard.
Mm.
That, like, to me, that makes sense that it was a point in your life when, you were doing the drums, right?
Yeah.
I mean, nothing nothing comes closer, I would say, to what's going on in poetry than keeping up with rhythm.
Yeah.
So that makes sense to me. In terms of my own writing of poetry, it feels like it was always there, almost feels like it was there from the beginning. I can remember the first poem I wrote. I can remember how bad it was and that I knew it was bad even when I was a kid. And maybe that's the part that could have made me know that I'd be serious about this for a while.
Mm.
The fact that I knew that I had made a mistake and that I had to find some other way to express myself. I
Mm.
think, as I said, I think I was very young, but maybe 8 years old, and it ended up being a rhyming poem. But I started with you guys have eaten pomegranates? Have you ever eaten a
Yeah.
pomegranate?
Mm.
So the inside of a pomegranate, I think, is so stunningly beautiful.
Mm.
That just it's like what jewels aspire to be,
Mm.
and they
Mm.
don't usually get there. And so I wanted to write about what the inside of pomegranate looked like and how it reminded me of garnets. And I wrote this entire poem. I think it was called Gems as Seen in Nature. So that's a hint right away that it was going to be pretty bad. And the whole thing rhymed. And I got to the end of the poem and I realized I had never mentioned pomegranates.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Mhm. And I thought, okay, I have to figure out how to write so that I actually talk about what I want to be talking about and not let the rhyme dictate what I'm going to be able to talk about. So that was like a baby step, but it was kind of a first step. And I never forgot it. I've never forgotten it.
Yeah.
I've also never been able to write about how pomegranates look like garnets, but
I remember I was also doing most of my graduate work at Binghamton, and somehow we had reconnected a few times about something else that I want to bring up later. But I remember that as I was playing a lot of music, somehow we connected like in front of the library tower or something, and you
yeah.
said, "Hey, why don't you accompany me to some of my poems?" And I was so excited about it. And I don't know how we never were able to manifest it, but
Oh,
I'll
that's too
never forget. I have this,
bad.
when I look at
Yeah.
this fondly, because you wrote this nice inscription here, and I won't say the year because it is a long time ago, but I remember that we were trying so hard, and I was like, "Wow, this is so exciting," because I could just be doing some classical stuff in the background
Yep.
to your poems, and I can
Right.
articulate the musicality of what this poem might be. Now, when you write, and it always made me think, like when you write, doesn't even have to be a poem. Are you hearing like, I mean, what are you? It, what's the term? Synesthesia. Are you mixing senses? Are you writing from a place sometimes, like you said, a rhyming poem? And when
Right.
you're writing prose or when you're writing whatever, do you hear other things? Are you incorporating? I don't know what.
No, that's a really interesting question, and I think writers love to talk about that question, actually. So, for me, it's both. It's whether I'm writing poetry or, let's say, a picture book or
Mm.
a novel. No matter what it is, if the rhythm doesn't come to me, and pretty quickly, that thing, whatever it is dead in the water.
Mm.
And I can't breathe life into that body. It comes with a rhythm. And there's an Irish novelist, and of course the Irish are about the most lyrical human beings on earth. but he wrote about how when he starts a novel, he begins with a rhythm. He begins with a rhythm. So it is that important. I just feel like it's your sign. It's the wave you're riding, and if you can catch that, then it will take you a long way, honestly. It's like having a voice when you write something. You do need to have a voice, and it should be one that you're kind of hearing clearly in your own head or feeling it. Allen Ginsberg, the poet, said, that poetry really comes from the movement of the blood through the body and, the pounding of the heart. And that's all part of it. And I I think that's true. I think that's just true when we write. We feel it when we go to the movies, right? Because anytime something scary is happening, you know that your body is changing at that moment. You can feel it, right? You can feel that, oh, this is making me sick and scared, or if there's like a romantic moment or a kiss you've been waiting for, everything kind of softens and relaxes. So yeah, I think art has that effect on us. It doesn't just affect our ears or our brain. I think it's really um it's our whole body. And I think that a big part of that is just kind of connecting to whatever that rhythm feels like.
And
Certainly with words, because we're used to hearing words, right? And words do have a rhythm. That's how we know if we're in trouble with with someone we're talking to and disagreeing with. That's how we know that things are going well. It's tone for sure.
Right.
Um, but I think it's also just the sound, the speed, the rhythm of words.
yeah, you're right. I had a question, but now the way you ended there reminded me of Clayton Eshelman, and he was a poet introduced to me at Binghamton, and he talked a lot about finding that um, sort of primal point. Like, can you get to that point? He talked about like poetry so raw it would tear the reader's face off, and he would use phrases like that. But then he also talked
Now
about
that was Clayton, not Melt.
uh I remember it as Clayton Eshelman, but
Okay,
I
because I was
I don't
going to
remember
say
it at all. So, no. Yeah.
Milt Kessler loved Clayton Eshelman. That was the first thing I
oh,
thought of
Yeah.
oh
when you
wow,
mentioned it.
okay.
So maybe he
No.
was there at some point, but he was never
Um
there when I was there, unless maybe briefly as a visitor. But go ahead, go to
yeah. I mean, yeah, maybe they were influencing each other and whatnot. And well, one thing that I love that Clayton Eshelman said is that he only publishes about 2% of what he writes, and he says he has all
Mm,
notebooks, and he says his wife helped him, with that, and I thought that was interesting. But the one thing that popped into my head as you were talking was this idea of like finding this sort of like root. Now I'm like paraphrasing it, but it's like this root, this primal root, a source of a feeling or an action. And he talked about climbing through the caves of Lascaux and getting to those cave paintings and that feeling of origin there, and getting back to this primal state. And so I,
right.
I think all that was just brought back as you were talking there. And I thought that was really interesting. And so he was kind of seeking that as well.
Hmm. Yeah. My guess is that, at least to some degree, all poets are seeking that, and probably really all artists
Mm,
are seeking that.
yeah.
You know,
And so do you ever approach it from like a different angle? Like, I want to
oh,
write
sure.
about this topic and approach it from that angle? Or is it always this feeling and
That tends to be the depth of
yeah.
certainly of a poem. I remember for a brief time we had a great poet, Jason Schinder, came for like a semester and taught, and I taught with him at Bennington for a summer, and he said whenever a student would say to him, "I have an idea for a poem," he would say, "I'm sorry to hear that."
Uh, that's great.
That's great.
Yeah. But sure, I mean, a lot of what poetry does is write toward an image. So you can often begin with an image. You can
Mm,
begin with just a scrap of a phrase that
mm,
comes into your mind. Um, a metaphor is
mm.
enough to, spark like the whole fire of a poem.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's lots of an emotion. Sometimes it's really just a very strong emotion. You take that to the page with you as if you're sort of asking the page, can you help me do something with this? Can you help me manage this? Or is there any way I can use this emotion to like express something to the world and then it can help someone else?
Right.
I'm I'm pretty keen on the idea that that's one of the real values of writing is that feeling that you can get when you read something that you love. And I'll bet you've both had this experience when you read what you needed to read at a particularly hard time in your life. And I've always thought of it as kind of like footsteps going through a swamp. You feel like you're in a swamp, but when you see those footsteps, you somehow know someone else made it through here.
Mm,
And if someone else made it through, I can kind of keep those footsteps in my line of sight and maybe I'll be able to get through this as well. I think that's hugely one of the things that art can do for us.
mm.
That footsteps analogy is a great idea for a poem.
Well, there you go. I'm sorry to hear that.
I well, it's interesting too because I'm just harkening back, and we keep talking about your class because for us, it was like a seminal moment, we're meeting and I honestly don't remember what we what our project was, Jen. Did I write a song or did we write a song together?
Uh, well, you sang the bottle. We
Oh, wow.
we did that, but I think there also was this quick
Wrote
kind of
some, right?
mini song that we sort of put together. Um, I think, but we definitely played the bottle.
Wow, which is crazy. That's not like our second album, by the way. Well, that's crazy. But I remember,
That's
we
wonderful.
we used this as a guide, I believe,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Against Forgetting, right? By Carolyn Forche.
Yeah, and I, as a result of this class, got minorly obsessed with the poetry of Carolyn Forche. I don't know if you remember this. And then in my graduate school years,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, after Professor Coiner, Constance Coiner, passed in with her daughter in that what was that Flight 800? Is that right? One of those.
Yeah, I believe so. Right. It went down
You,
over Long Island. It's
somehow
heartbreaking.
you had brought, I believe, Carolyn Forche to Binghamton.
Yeah.
And you
You
somehow
did.
got snuck me in or something, if I recall. I don't even remember. I was a graduate student, so who knows? I probably had every right to be there. But I remember at the end, you introduced me to her, and it was like having the Beatles introduce you to the Rolling Stones. It was like, oh my gosh, and she signed there, and
Oh.
yeah, you were very, very what's the term? You were a mentor for us, and
Mm,
my question was about this. So when you
yeah.
chose anthology, because this has this overall theme against forgetting,
Yes.
um,
Bearing
uh,
witness. Poetry of witness,
yeah,
I think. Hmm.
yeah, that's Jamie and I had literally for X amount of years, I won't say how many, we still talk about this, which is
Good.
crazy. It'd be like a late night and we'll still talk about the, literally the poetry of witness, and some of our
Yes.
songs have to deal with a similar perspective, I would say.
That's
Where
a,
did
that's a great anthology. I still teach from it. And I'm so glad that you brought that book up, because I meant to say kind of almost at the start, um, that part of me wanted to talk about the day today because it's the day after yet another um, demonstrator was murdered
Mm.
in Minnesota. And we do have to respond to those things and we have to bear witness about them. And so it feels like you should never kind of follow up a day like that uh, with silence, because it's against forgetting when you bear witness, and when you're silent, it is kind of a way of forgetting, certainly for me. And, it's hard to remember something as terrible as someone, being shot in the back 10 times because they're trying to help another demonstrator who's been, forcibly thrown down on the ground. And heartbreaking to live in a country where that is somehow become acceptable behavior, where we don't all go running, screaming into the streets to say, stop. You have to stop this now. And Carolyn has spent so much of her life putting herself into dangerous situations, right? And
Whole liberation,
bearing
yeah,
witness.
right,
Mhm.
yeah,
And she
stuff.
caught a lot of flack at the earlier part of her career for doing that. People basically saying, well, you don't have any right to talk about those things, or you shouldn't be talking about those things, or you're overemphasizing these political events or murders in El Salvador and people being disappeared. I don't know how you could really say at someone, what are they overstating the case or responding to? That's impossible. It's almost literally impossible. Again, short of people just running out into the street and saying, this has to stop right now. So, yeah, I'm glad we bring that into a conversation about poetry, about art.
Uh, it is an interesting time right now, and in case anyone's wondering, I am wearing a scarf because we're also in the middle of 27-inch, uh,
True.
daily.
Snowstorm.
Well, if the power should go out here, you'll know why
Yeah.
we did
Yeah.
this, but it is an interesting time right now, and I think there are so many links to history that, whether it's what Caroline Forche was doing, or this is 20th century poetry of
Mhm.
witness.
Right.
And what I think it did for me personally was, as most writers, and I couldn't even tell you how many songs, like to write, the lyric or the music.
Hmm.
A lot of them like to just do it so that people look at them, or so that there's a need to be heard. And
Right.
I think what transitions here is, I don't need to be heard. We just need to look around, and it
Hmm.
changes the whole perspective. And
Hmm.
that's definitely what happens for me. I mean, I think
Yes.
we have a song called The Forest's End, which is, it's like a visual perspective of watching what happens when the forests go away,
Yeah.
and that's the poetry of that is witnessing something and just speaking to it, as opposed to just emoting and going,
Hmm.
I'm in love, or I like,
Right.
you have a knack in all of your poetry and all of your writings of, I think, articulating that space perfectly. But I did want to ask you something else about, because you don't just write poems,
No.
you're not just a poet, right? So, and then, you mentioned earlier your picture books and
Hmm.
novels. Where does your artistic bend lead you now? What are you working on these days?
I think I almost always am writing in multiple genres. And I pretty much always have been, um, let's say since I was a teenager, something like that. And for me, it's almost a bit of a safety net because if, let's say, a novel's not going well, it's okay. I can step back and pick up a poem that I know I need to revise or explore um, an idea. Here we go to the idea, an idea that I have for like a children's book or a children's novel. And I can work on that while I'm kind of waiting for things to calm, for the waters to calm enough so that I can return to that novel, let's say. So I thought you were going to say, is there is there anything you won't write? Because I often
Oh,
feel
wow.
that way. Like I would write the back of cereal boxes if I couldn't if I couldn't write anything else. It is a little bit of a Jones, I mean, it's definitely a little bit of an addiction, but Some things are just, they come to you for this particular form, and some come in another. And it's just, yeah, it's just the way that I work. And I guess I've kind of always worked that way because there are some things that I feel are, they're meant, the story is meant to go on for a long time. And other things, it could really be just an image or a metaphor. And it feels like that needs to be a poem. The only time I can think of when one turned into another was a poem I was trying to write about something that one of my doctors had said to me about himself and his childhood. He was from Lebanon, and he had come to this country. And I asked him, "What did you miss most about Lebanon?" And he said, "I miss the silence in the mountains." And I thought that was such a beautiful thing. And I tried to write a poem about it. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't I couldn't get there, you know? I could I couldn't get that song, right? And so many years later, I ended up writing a picture book, and it's called The Silence in the Mountains, and it's about um, a boy whose family moves. I don't say the country, but I think it's clear that it's the Middle East, and they can only bring some things with them. And what the boy misses most is the silence in the mountains. So that's kind of what it's about. It's about him and his family trying to adjust to this new life and how he's able to find a different kind of silence in the countryside in America. So that's the only example I can think of, though. Usually things are, C.S. Lewis has this great, great essay on the subject on 3 ways of writing for children. Did I ever make you guys read that?
I
Or
so
probably not, because it wasn't a writing for children class. But it's so brilliant, and every writer should read it because a big part of what he talks about in that essay is how, he doesn't write children's books because he thinks it's going to be commercially successful
Right.
or because that's what he's done in the past. He said it's because this is the only form this thing can take. Just like somebody who writes a death march, a musician who does that, it's because that's how they can express the ideas or the emotions of that thing that they need to kind of share. So yeah, everybody should read that essay by C. And it's not long at all. It's like 5 pages of just sheer brilliance from the man who brought us The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yep. And do you, when you writing a children's book or a picture book,
Yeah,
are you seeing the imagery, like and then how does that incarnate? Like, do you describe, like, how does that become
a
a book?
picture book.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, the first picture book I ever did, I I wept when I saw when I saw the illustrations, and not in a good way. And I remember sort of wailing to my editor, but that's not the way I saw it in my mind. And she was this great children's writer herself, as well as editor, named Charlotte Zoloto. And she said, "Liz, I have published whatever it was, like 100 books. And I have never yet had a single book where the illustrations matched what I had in my head." So that was an important lesson, I would say. And I've always told like students in my writing for children class, I had a great ceramics teacher who was actually teaching at Binghamton for a little while. And she told us once, because we were making these like ceramic vases and being so careful with the glazes we put on and the colors we chose and the patterns. And she said, I understand that you're all working very hard on this, but when you put it in the kiln, you give it over to the flame. And I think that's a perfect metaphor
that's
for
great.
illustration. You give it over to the flame of the artist. And you just have to learn to look at it that way. And then you can appreciate the genius of what the other person does. I adore the illustrations for that first book now because I can see, you
Wow.
know, I can see what the illustrator brought to that and how much they were seeing and creating that I hadn't. So it's a pretty great collaboration and it's usually a completely silent one. So
Yeah, I had a children's author said that she had never met any of her illustrators, like never
yeah,
even met them.
Oh, wow.
that is
Uh,
pretty typical.
yeah, and it does seem like a massive disconnect, like if you just like look at it like that. But then when you just described it, it is like, well, here's this person's interpretation of the
Yeah,
writing.
right.
And then, so it sounds like maybe it also got you to look at your writing slightly differently and, you know, take an
Yeah,
outside in perspective on it. And it's good that you were able to, feel okay about it and still not feel like, it wasn't the right illustrations. But,
right.
um, yeah, it
I'm
must,
sorry, are you guys hearing a lot of background noise here?
no,
No, it's not bothering you? Okay, good. 'Cause
And I can
somebody is
well,
ruffling through a drawer of what feel like
uh,
every tool in the house.
I had someone come down. I'm in my basement. I had someone come down during it, but
and you didn't hear my dog scratching at the door either, right?
no, no,
No,
But,
no, and you
let the
can
no.
hope
dog
that
in.
others will not, hear those sounds either, those ambient noises.
So, do
Um,
you have any, poets that, you feel like
Oh, no.
inspired you, and still inspire you today?
Wait, hold on, I wanna get a drum roll for this.
oh, is there somebody's name I'm supposed to say?
I don't know, I don't
Well,
know.
No.
I think there are different poets who have truly affected me and directed me really at different times in my life.
Mhm,
The first one for sure was Robert Frost.
mm,
Um, and that's when I was 10 and I received the first book of poems I think I'd ever gotten by one poet. And I still love that book. It's called You Come To.
Oh,
And it's
oh,
some
cool.
great poems by Robert Frost. And then, but the other one that really stands out to me is when I was maybe 17 and I was standing in the high school library and I pulled out the book Ariel by Sylvia Plath. Oh my
Oh,
God, is that You Come Too? Or is it?
yep, it's You Come Too. I loved this book. This
That's
one
amazing. That,
great.
this is this this is probably I mean, I loved this too. Look, I mean, I even earmarked pages I must have liked when I was, the
that is
last in
so
the
great.
ring. I was obsessed with Frost for a good many years. And then you said, who is the second one?
Sylvia
Did
Plath.
you say Pence?
Mm,
Sylvia
Oh,
Plath. I
oh,
remember pulling out the book Ariel. I guess that was her first posthumous book.
Ariel,
And
yeah.
literally sinking down onto the carpet of the library because I did not want it like let go of that book. And
mm.
Wow.
it was so powerful. I couldn't just stand there reading it. It kind of knocked me off my feet. I had to sit down to read it. So yeah. And then at different times it has been different people. It seems like they come to you when you need them.
Mm,
It's kind of like that old expression, when the student is ready, the teacher will come.
mm.
So when the reader is ready, I think the book will come. And yeah, I think I believe that.
Yeah,
What happens in that book? Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say I enjoyed, we read Sylvia Plath in your class, and then we, touched on Emily Dickinson,
Hmm.
also William Carlos Williams, um, and I remember those discussions, and I really enjoyed those, and learned a lot also just about the type of poetry that William Carlos Williams was doing,
Yeah.
and that to me is really like capturing a very specific moment, you know,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
the famous wheelbarrow
Right.
poem
Right.
also like it plays around with time, I think, too, because it unfolds until finally you see the full picture, and it's
You're absolutely right. I never thought about that before. It even plays with time in the sense that it it refers to like the day before or right? Because
Yeah.
the wheelbarrow is glazed with rainwater. So
right,
it's got time built into it.
right, and it's like so much depends on, in the end, it's the rain
Mm,
on a farm, you know,
yeah.
and that unfolds in such a short amount of time. I think one of the reasons why that poem is so loved. And so yeah, like those moments to capture that, almost like a haiku, even like that very
Yes.
short kind of
Yes.
kind of expression. Um, so and we talked a little bit about Emily Dickinson and capturing depression, and like
Sure.
those types of emotions. Um, and so I mean, and Sylvia Plath, of course. Uh, so how about like, are there any musicians that you feel like speak to
Oh.
you? Their lyrics, with the way their music is performed.
Yes, definitely. The first one that came to my mind, and there are many contemporary musicians that matter to me a lot, but the first person that came to my mind was Beethoven. And what I was remembering, you might have seen me smiling because John Gardner was my first husband, and I can only remember two fights we ever had in our lives together. One was over who was greater, Beethoven or Mozart? And the other was over who
Obviously,
was the
Mozart.
greater writer, Hawthorne or Melville. That one I was so angry at, I got out of the car. I
Wow,
was
Really?
just walked away.
so funny.
So it's
So,
obviously Hawthorne.
what's that?
Hawthorne's obviously better, right?
Thank you.
Come on.
Thank you. I felt that that was as clear as Beethoven being greater than Mozart. But, and also, when you get a bit older, then you begin to be able to acknowledge, yeah, but Mozart is
Yeah.
really
Okay.
freaking great himself. And so is Melville, so, but yeah, those,
I remember my first day, and I think we talked about this before, in your classroom. I got there and I'm like, I'm going to try this class out. I'm sitting against the wall. There was one of those gray um, shelves with like all these John Gardner books.
yeah.
And you did mention, and we were talking about this earlier. You did say something like, if you ask me about him, what did you say exactly?
Oh, I think what I might have said is,
Critical.
yeah, you there are very few rules in this classroom, but if you have something really negative or nasty you want to say about John Gardner, don't say it in this classroom. Don't say it to me because, and then I would explain that he had been like the greatest teacher I ever had, for one thing, and my first husband. And I thought just this great soul. And I could not be objective about him at all. I remember walking with the husband of a friend once around Otsaningo Park, right? I don't know
Uh-huh.
if you guys remember that. And they had like a big sort of lake pond in the middle of it. And we were talking about contemporary authors or something. And I mentioned John Gardner. And this guy said, well, I always thought he was quite the pompous ass. And I remember there
Oh,
was an instant where I literally thought about just pushing him into the pond and continuing on my walk around the water. And I remember I asked, you know, are you aware that I was married to this man? And he said, yes. And I thought, okay, well, then we're
more
dealing
reason.
with a
Uh,
bigger issue than
yeah.
aesthetic here.
Yeah. Oh
And,
wow.
yeah, believe it or not, that guy turned out to be an amazing person. an amazing
Yeah.
person. He did struggle. He did struggle with things, and I think one of them was being on the spectrum. But he was a lovely. He was actually a lovely person. He came over and buried my dog for me when my dog died.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, and we did that so that my daughter wouldn't have to come home
Mm.
and see
oh,
her dog getting stiffer and stiffer,
oh
less
my
and less
gosh.
like himself. So I'll never forget
So
that.
he
I mean, it was
redeemed
like
himself
he must
even
have
yeah,
dropped the phone and run over with his shovel.
wow.
So I'm glad I didn't push him into the pond.
Were you objective now with regard to John Gardner?
Oh no.
Yeah, right?
No,
Did
not
you
at
ever be?
all. Not at
Right?
all. I did teach Grendel a few years ago, and I
Oh,
did kind of tell the class, look, this is the scoop. So, we can talk about the themes, we can talk about the writing, but just don't attack this writer. Which I mean, you never need to do that anyway. That's the most boring kind of conversation you could ever have in a class, right? I really like this. I really hate this.
yeah,
So, I mean, there's so many other ways to talk about, what's happening or how you're responding or one of the million things that's going on in a book. And our opinions really hardly matter in that sense. I like, I hate, you know. Now, you were saying something about, that's right. Jamie, weren't you saying something? It might have just been we were talking amongst ourselves that there was a little bit of a kind of lively debate that went on about 9 Inch Nails,
Yeah,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And emotions do run high at at that time, but it sounded like both people were able to articulate why they felt the way they felt about the
bingo.
work itself. And
Yes.
that's that's always okay,
yeah,
because you can learn. You can learn from, you know, opposition is fruitful, is what uh, William Blake said.
yeah.
Mm,
And I'm sure that guy, the Nine Inch Nail fan, he's probably really pissed off. But you'd like to think that later on he's like processing it, and he probably did learn something from that,
Yeah.
dialogue. And I thought it was sort of kind of brave for that woman just to come out and say that.
Yes.
And she wasn't saying it to, you know, be controversial or whatever, but that's how she felt about it.
Right.
Another lively debate in your class, we had
TS
talked about
Eliot?
this, yeah,
TS Eliot.
over the phone, but
Uh-huh.
when there's this one guy said how much he hated T.S. Eliot, and
Okay.
I don't know if you remember this, but he kind of went into like this diatribe about like
Painful
it,
detail.
this
Yeah,
guy's just trying to make himself look like he's smart. He uses footnotes, and
Yeah.
this isn't expression. There's no emotion, and he's just like some, like ivory tower guy, and I hate it. And he really went off on it. And then, you handled it really well, I thought, and you explained, that it's one way to express yourself, and this is what he needs to do to get his point across. Um and so because we talked about the wasteland, for a class or two, and you had us do a creative project around it, and he was just like not having it.
I hate it. I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah. So and there are a couple of people that were popping up on both sides of that argument. But I mean,
Sure.
imagine you have these types of debates in your class like all the time about stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. They definitely do crop up. And I think, unlike what it feels like we're seeing in the world, which is where people can't and won't and don't listen to each other, I'm seeing more and more really good listening inside the classroom, which I
great.
have to say gives me hope for the future.
Hmm.
A couple of years ago, when October 7th happened in Israel, there were two young women in my class, and one had lived in Israel for a long time and had family there, and the other was a young woman who was Palestinian. And
Oh, wow.
they were so incredibly kind and caring to each other. And it really felt almost like they had between them what you guys had between them, which was a shared understanding of the actual lived experience on the ground. And they both certainly believed in peace, um, and opposed violence. And, where I was afraid at first, oh my God, this could really get bad. It sort of was the opposite. And I was kind of wonderstruck by how well they handled that and who they were, how it showed who they were. So I feel like an awful lot of young people in this particular generation are they're so gentle. It's almost like they must be looking at the grown-ups around them saying, "You guys are out of your minds."
Yeah.
Yeah.
We we have to find another way. We have to save the planet. We have to not kill each other off, and I think it leads to these ability to have these great conversations.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought that up because I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about like what you're seeing now, that with students, with people of that age, because it is the world keeps changing
Mm,
with everything, social media, just electronics in
Oof.
general,
yes,
and then what's
yes.
happening
Boy.
with the world, and
Oof.
um,
How much
you know,
time we have?
yeah, I know,
Like
right? Such
2
a
minutes.
Wow.
I
and
was gonna say,
I have a
I'm gonna
young
give you
gigantic
a
question.
two-minute answer for that.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I I really do think I know one hears a lot of complaints about the young people now, but I have had the opposite experience, and I really feel as though they're bringing this incredible caring and idealism with them. Admittedly, I've got a select group because I'm just basically talking about the kids at Binghamton University, though lately, almost as soon as I announced my retirement, in fact, I began teaching at the local prison in Broome County. And I was knocked out by those women, absolutely knocked out
Wow.
by them. So there's there's that. And then at the same time, I have to say, I worry a lot for them about the effect of social media. And they will all say that they know they're addicted, they feel the addiction, and it scares them.
Mhm.
It does scare them. So I think that's a huge factor right now.
Yeah.
And it's working against them, but I see so much strength and kindness and love in them, really, that I think they're going to find their way through even that blank wall that is a screen.
Mm.
So this has been so much fun. And I know you guys have to go running off, and I have dolphins to go try to find swimming around.
Oh my
Very,
gosh.
I
very
know.
You sent us
obvious.
No.
photos of how beautifully sunny it is, and there's literally already like 8 inches here. It's crazy of
Yeah.
snow.
It's crazy that those two realities can exist
Yeah.
in the same country. But maybe that's a metaphor for other things that exist
Yeah.
in
It's a
this
great idea
country.
for a poem.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? All
Well,
right,
Liz,
guys.
yeah.
Well, I always did love you, and I still do.
Thank you, Liz. This was wonderful. And
Is
Thanks so much.
is there a work that you're coming out with that you wanna talk about at all or promote or bring up
I'm
or
working on some children's book sort of ideas, really, with an editor right now. I'm working on poems, so we'll sort of see what happens with that.
great.
looking forward to it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Looking forward to that. Thank you. And thanks everybody for watching and listening. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye. Thanks.